And welcome to our DAAN meeting for the end of the 2024-25 school year. It's exciting end of year, big end of year for me. I have twins who are graduating from high school. I'm like in kind of a state of disbelief, actually. But anyway, so it's a meaningful end of year for me. So we are actually, our team is a little short today. We had some family emergencies in both the accountability and our assessment team. But here's our team. I'm Evan Bartelheim. I'm the project director for accountability and data literacy. And Hillary, who's usually with us, is out today, but I'm also joined in the room by Roy and Karina. You met them on the way in if you were here. Also, our assessment team, Stephen Bartlett, who's joining me. So it's going to be all dudes today. So nothing but dudes. Sarah is also out with a little family emergency. So we are holding down the fort, and Diane, who's a support for them. We may be joined by Marcus Betancourt later. He's on Zoom, okay? And I don't know if Marcus can weigh in on things, but he also, just remember, if you need some technical questions answered, Wednesdays at 1 this week, you can join there, and Marcus is always ready to answer the detailed nitty-gritty questions for you. Just a reminder of the purpose of DAAN. Sometimes it's easy to forget. We are a network, and we do have folks in the room, and I really appreciate those of you who can come in person, and it gives us an opportunity to chat, things that get surfaced. I was just telling one of our DAAN colleagues how a question he asked in another meeting made me go, that's an interesting question. It's about the collection of universal benefit applications and the impact it might have on state and federal programs. So that's the kind of thing that happens when we have the synergy of people in the room. But we are here to share with you the latest information from the State Board of Education, and there's a lot this month to share. Also, anything coming out of the CDE, our regional assessment network. Steve and I were just in Sacramento for that, and we learned a lot there. And just any practices around assessment and data-driven continuous improvement. We put everything in our Canvas page, and we will update anything that's not there right now. If there are links that we could cover that aren't there for some reason, we'll make sure we'll double back. Sometimes they get lost in the last minute shuffle. But Canvas is always a good place to look for our resources that we share with you. The information is current as of last Friday. We took the day off yesterday for the most part, so did CDE. So I don't think anything's changed over the weekend, but you never know. Maybe there's some practices that Marcus has picked up on over the weekend. But if you have questions for us, if you're in the room, give us a minute to get you on mic so people in the audience on Zoom can hear. But if you want to ask something in chat, we're going to just kind of back and forth it here. Or you can always submit your questions after the fact to us, and we always do our follow-up where we answer everything and give you some of the links that you may need. We do have meetings for next year already set, so make sure you mark your calendars. There's also a flyer in Canvas. But here are the dates for next year. We are doing kind of a preliminary on August 26th was unusual for us. We don't usually do something quite that early, but we want to do a follow-up on the assessment and accountability information meeting. It's kind of a welcome. And we actually, I don't think we included it. They haven't sent it out yet, have they? The August 15th date, is that one? Or when is it? September 9th. The SCOE and CDE are going to be, if you're a new CAASPP administrator, are going to be doing a live meeting here at LACO that will promote more during the summer. But we wanted to get kind of slide in there and do a quick welcome back, and especially for new people who are joining us in August via Zoom. And then we have several of our meetings are going to be, again, hybrids here. And then we don't know yet with our May meeting. We have some conflicts with room space. Oh, you know what? Sorry, let me go back. If you are an existing DAAN member, you don't have to do anything. We roll everybody over each year. So yeah, this is for new folks, but don't bother registering for now. If you're already a member, we roll you over and you'll get announcements just like you do currently through our OMS system. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So in the chat, it's school's out, shout out. I already mentioned that I've got twins who are about to graduate. I'm excited about that. That's my big end of journey, I guess. Well, at least end of K-12 journey. But with a neighbor, just turn and talk for a minute or in the chat. Tell us a recent outcome, big win this year related to your work, your own learning journey. Maybe you've just completed your thesis for your dissertation, I don't or if you have someone you love, like I do, take a minute to chat with your neighbor or drop it in the chat. All right, Stephen, what do we got in the chat?
In the chat, Gloria writes, her oldest son graduates next week. Diana writes, my niece Riley is matriculating the 6th grade. Exciting time. Middle school. Betsy tells us she's retiring. Congratulations, Betsy. Thank you for all the help over the last 14 years of the DAAN meetings. And some congratulations from our fellow DAAN members.
Well, yeah, if you're retiring or moving to a different position, make sure you let us know, because we always want to stay on top of, anybody who's maybe coming in new. And also for those of you who've been with us a while, you never go too far, right, Bob?
No, you don't. In fact, I'm going to be continuing to help out around there this next year, apparently.
For those of you on Zoom, we have a former DAAN member who retired, but he got dragged back in, just like,
Yeah,
like in The Godfather.
I enjoy it.
Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to go run through, we got a lot of accountability information that is kind of trickling out that will be of interest to you related to the dashboard. First, just some reminders about the dashboard timeline. If you are responsible for submitting the local indicators for your LEA, the window for submitting, which is a dashboard coordinator role, opens on June 2nd and is open through August 1st this year. And so that should be ample time. And if you're the dashboard coordinator for your LEA, that role will last through that window. So there shouldn't be no changes. But if somebody is retiring, and make sure that they transfer that information over, have a backup to put that information up. So that should be, remember, the local indicators should be shared with your board in conjunction with the approval of the LCAP before they're uploaded. And you want to make sure you put in the date at which they went to the board, because the system allows you to put a date after July 1st, but if it does, it'll default to standard not met for the local indicators. So you just want to make sure it's a date prior to July 1st. The dashboard coordinator database is going to reset on August 15th. So even if nothing has changed, you still have to submit, again, another application by August 15th. And then, as of August 18th, that'll go to your superintendent or your charter school administrator for approval. And there are 2 roles. You can have 2 people serving in dashboard coordinator capacity. And there's another role, which is kind of an ancillary one. And the superintendent or charter school administrator always has a role too, that they can see everything. And then finally, this year, just a reminder that you're required to upload a PDF of your LEA's LCAP by October 31st. So there's a window that will open in the dashboard portal for submitting the LCAP. All that information will reiterate throughout the summer, because I think we support our LEAs to make sure they get everything that they need to posted and don't get dung for any of those things. As far as the dashboard release, this is an exciting year. So there's a bunch of stuff I'm going to share with you this morning that's related to changes to the dashboard, or potential changes to the dashboard, that the State Board of Education is going to be finalizing at their July 9th and 10th meeting. And then our CALPADS end of year, this is all moved up. So there's a submission deadline, certification of the amendment. The amendment window is August 8th this year. So that's the very last date. And then there's a separate CALPADS, the cohort poll for your graduating seniors. That's on August 15th. And there's a little bit of a gap between the two that I'll talk about coming up. And then there's a statutory date for releasing this year of November 15th. The dashboard has to be published by November 15th this year. And then in 2026, it'll be October 15th. So as of last week, the CDE is saying they're not sure if there will be a private preview this year. If there is, it's going to be very short, like maybe 1 day in advance, because the timeline has been so abbreviated. So expect it by November 15th. I wouldn't expect it any earlier this year. I think they'll probably deliver it by the November 15th date, because it's a real tight turnaround for them. So let me give you the updates from the state board that are all relevant to your roles in accountability. First of all, they went over a bunch of stuff in item 2, which we've linked here, and also it's in your Canvas page. But they reviewed some new and existing college career indicator measures. They talked about options for the adoption of growth model performance categories, as well as what role growth may play in the LCFF eligibility. They talked about the board asked for the state to give some updates on differentiated assistance outcomes for long-term English learners, because we know if you have long-term English learners, you know they had a big impact on your dashboard this year. They reviewed the options for incorporating science into the LCFF for DA eligibility. So we're going to talk about that briefly. I actually added a question to our DAAN survey because I'd like to get your feedback on that as well, what your thoughts are. They reviewed the DAS criteria. They also have some changes that they may need to make to the priority 1 local indicator for a teacher assignment date and how that appears. And like I said, there is they talked in great detail. I'm going to abbreviate everything, give you the pertinent facts, but if you want to go watch it, I've got a link there to take you right to item 2, which was like a 2-hour item. It was long. So first of all, the college and career indicator, there are a couple things here, and I want to bring to your attention. The removal of course code 9227, which is college credit course other, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about these. Modifying advanced placement international baccalaureate measures to include completion of coursework with a C- or better, which could have a huge positive impact for a lot of LEAs. And then the removal of the regional occupational center program participation from the state and federal jobs programs. And I'll just address that here. That's basically redundant at this point, because that if you have students who are you're referring to ROCPs, that's getting picked up elsewhere. So it's not necessarily something they need to report in two ways. And I think they just had a handful of LEAs reported that way. So this was a big one. So they're proposing that they're going to remove this code for this college credit course other. The reason being it's kind of this catch-all. And so we know that you have a college credit course code. It can be either an academic or a CTE college course. And so if it's an academic course, you have college credit English, college credit math. You know, they have these kind of big catch-alls. Well, there's college credit other, and it was picking up a ton of kind of unusual courses, including like AP courses. It's like people didn't quite know where to put it. So it was really making for some messy data. And so what they want to do is eliminate that college credit course code and give some guidance to people as to where they should put it. There are a lot of courses in there that really appear like they should be falling elsewhere anyway. But there are also some things that may not actually meet the standard that the state expects for college credit courses. So they had a whole list. And so you saw there's like career and life planning, public speaking, things like that. Those probably should go under another course code, like public speaking should be like under English. So they wanted to clean that up, but it's not going to transpire until the fall. So it's not going, they're not retroactively changing these things this year, but moving forward, they're going to send out guidance. So next year, the course code can be more accurately identified. And again, these are all things the state board has yet to act on. This is all information shared in advance of that July meeting, but I wanted you to have it on your agenda now or on your radar. This was a big move, right? So one of the things that the state, the CDE had noted was that assessments are really overrepresented, perhaps might be the way they put it, in the college career indicator. And part of that reason is when the state created their ESSA plan initially, they didn't have 11th grade assessments included under the academic indicators. They put it in the college career indicator, and then they built this whole college career indicator, you know, with all these pieces to it. And then the Fed said, no, you have to have 11th grade in your academic indicators. So it ends up being represented in 2 places, right? And so then in addition, we've got advanced placement and international baccalaureate exams being represented in there. And so there's a sense that the college career indicator is perhaps overrepresented by assessments. So they took a look at some of the data, and they actually found that if you were to hold the standard being students were enrolled in an AP course and received a C- or better, which is somewhat equivalent to what we do with college courses, that we would have a significant increase in the number of students who met that standard. So that's a plus, right? We could have more students who would meet the criteria for 2 AP or IB exams, and you've got the numbers down here to share the difference. In addition, you know, we know there are a lot of reasons students may not take the AP courses for financial reasons. My daughters this year they took the AP course, but they didn't take the exam because their colleges are not recognizing those for credit. So they're like, why add extra stress? So they're looking at a possibility of doing a both and, right? Because we also know some students may be taking a an exam but not taking the course, although that's a little bit different, circumstance. But in this case, they thought they may be expanding the AP to include courses. It would also make it easier for you to know in advance where students stood if they'd taken the course. It's a lot harder sometimes to get that College Board data, and the College Board is not really good in terms of people having access to it for everybody to see where students stand. So I think both these would have a pretty positive impact on College Career Indicator. So the question in the room was, where does dual enrollment figure into all this? It's still there, and they aren't changing anything other than what I just talked about, possibly removing that course code. But yeah, they will still continue. They'll still recognize dual enrollment in the same way.
This would be for the 2026 then?
Yeah, this would be for the 2026 dashboard, any changes. So there'd be ample time to ramp this up and make some changes as well. They also reviewed the State Seal of Civic Engagement. This was a piece that they were just collecting data on. And so there's a possibility that the State Seal of Civic Engagement could be added even sooner. So they did an ad hoc review of data, and they found that there were 14,552 students last year who were submitted for the State Seal of Civic Engagement. And 3/4 were already prepared, were identified as prepared through another measure. But this actually would allow us 3,300 additional students who weren't identified as prepared or approaching prepared to benefit from the inclusion of the State Seal of Civic Engagement. Now, there's some other things I'll talk to, and I'll get to kind of the board feedback so you may get a sense of where this might go. So the other piece was they wanted, remember there were these additional indicators which were proposed in 2019-20 for possible inclusion. They've been collecting data. Many of you have been submitting your data religiously around internships, student-led enterprise, work-based learning, simulated work-based learning, and the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, the ASVAB. So they looked at the data and they found it kind of peaked in that year right after the pandemic when the schools came back in, and then subsequently they've kind of flattened out. So it's an interesting thing. They're not going to take action on this, but they do want some extra data. I will say this: here's the feedback they received from the board. So they did say the board had expressed interest. This is over everything. They were very interested in moving to course taking this is for the APIB as an alternative to just the exams, and they wanted to know the number of exam takers. So I think that seems very positive, especially because it could add a lot of opportunities for districts who have 12th graders to add more students to the prepared category. They also wanted to talk more to your question about what constitutes a dual credit course and how they can help LEAs change their course codes to make that. And that's always been a concern, that things aren't being properly coded. So they're asking for a review of the course names and also look at the minimum number of credits. I think there's an expectation that shouldn't be like little 1-credit classes that we're giving that they're giving credit for, given the bigger picture. And they definitely wanted to know, with the State Seal of Civic Engagement, what does robust civic education look like? That's kind of one of those things where there's not really clear what that looks like in terms of what you're reporting. And so before they add it, there's going to be a conversation in July probably about what does it look like, how many hours does that entail, and kind of standardize what they're submitting. And then finally, they want to continue to review the 4 possible new career measures. This is my little aside because I asked CDE, I'm like, I've been touting these things for a long time. I worked in CT for a long time, back when we had ROP and we had community classrooms and cooperative vocational ed classrooms. I know a lot of school districts do these, and I feel like it's just kind of lost its momentum. So I feel like if you're an LEA that does these types of things, really maybe a good time to send a letter to the board saying these are important to us, because I feel like they just kind of lost the momentum. And so they are going to ask, the state board is kind of asking, or is going to be asked to weigh in, like, do we want to continue asking people to collect these if we're not ever going to add it to the College Career Indicator? It's just a lot of work and possibly, not going anywhere. So Look to this the next meeting for them to be kind of pressed on this a little bit. Hopefully, there's enough data there to support the inclusion of it, because I think those are really important ways that kids can become prepared. So they also then looked at growth on the dashboard. We talked about a lot about this last time, but we'll add a little bit more. So the state board is going to be considering in July the addition of some performance standards for student level growth data, so the growth model, right? And so they would look at the total number of performance categories as well as the name and label that, so similar to our achievement level descriptors that we have in the CAASPP, right? So they need to figure out what to be called. And then they need to consider including growth in LCFF, or differentiated assistance eligibility. And that's kind of an interesting factor. And the timing makes it really hard. So the CDE has said they'll come back with options for the performance standards as well as potential cut points and ranges in July. They didn't offer that at this meeting. But here's some of the things that were noted. This is actually back to the March meeting. There are several things here that they could do for incorporating growth data in the dashboard and LCFF. So they could make the ELA math growth scores into full indicators on the dashboard. They could modify the components of the existing academic indicators for ELA math to include growth. They could modify differentiated assistance to include ELA math growth. Now you'll notice those all have an asterisk. And that's because the timing is not going to work out. As each year goes by and the dashboard has to be published early, they don't have adequate time to actually calculate. You need to have the full data set, and then it takes a lot of computing power to actually do all the growth calculation. So these are not really feasible. So that kind of moves the growth indicators and what they could do with them into like a separate category. Because if you can't identify growth at the same time as all the other state indicators come out, and then identify who would be eligible for differentiated assistance based on those, you kind of have reached a dead end. So that's a problem. They could also then, adopt performance standards, which they're talking about in July, and then do nothing, just continue to publish growth as strictly an informational item. And then also modifying the ESSA criteria to include ELA and math. And the state board had indicated in March, they are not interested at all in opening up the ESSA plan again. So that's a kind of a non-starter. That's not going to change for the foreseeable future. So here's the problem you run into. By the time, and this just kind of lays out how the CAASPP data flows into growth data, it takes a while. You get the end of year submission for the testing, and then the validation. Then you do your CALPADS so you can match up all the data of the students themselves, the demographic processing, and then the academic indicator has to be processed first. And that takes all the way till October 15th. So already you can see, then it doesn't leave a lot of time for the growth processing between that October 15th. So it's not likely that it's ever going to get any faster. So what the feedback from the state board was, they're looking for ways that it can be used as an indicator to not trigger differentiated assistance. And the LASSO office, as the folks who run the LCAP, whatnot, they made it clear it is possible for state board to decide on new indicators that do not directly determine differentiated assistance. So it is possible. They're basically interpreting ed code to say, yes, you can add these as indicators without triggering DA. A state board asked for CDE to come back to them in July with a recommendation for 5 growth categories. So there are 3 currently. They had the current ones were typical, above typical, and below typical. Those were the 3, and now they're asking for 5, and they're going to come back with cut scores for those. And then the state board asked for possibilities for adding student growth as part of like a supplemental release and including it for accountability in some other way besides differentiated assistance. So we'll see what kind of ideas they come up with, but it's very unlikely to ever be used for direct DA identification in the short run, or even long run probably, just because the time it takes to calculate it. Then state board asked differentiated assistance information about LTELs, right? And so there were 215 districts and county offices statewide who identified they met the criteria for eligibility for differentiated assistance for the long-term English learner student group. Now that's not exclusive. They may have met it in several other ways. In LA County, we had 30 or 31. I'm looking at my Moss friend. I think it was 30. of our districts who are eligible, and I don't remember our charter schools who are eligible for long-term English learners. Actually, it wouldn't have been charters because they need 2 years worth of data, and they didn't count LTELs the prior year. But what you'll notice, these are the top areas around which they were LTELs were identified. What you'll notice jump out at you is priority 4, which is pupil achievement, which is the academic indicators, is involved in every single one. So that was consistent, and that also includes the ELPI. But for most part, I think it was the academic indicators are either both red or red and orange for this student group. So this was a major factor in identification this year, and their state board president, Linda Darling Hammond, had a nice little aside. She said, unlike our academic indicator for English learners, where you benefit from having the students who are reclassified for up to 4 years, the long-term English learners, as soon as they reach, they're eligible to be reclassified, are removed from the calculation. So you're kind of constantly undermining yourself. So, I think they are looking at, are there ways to possibly revisit this particular factor? But I think there's a lot of attention has been placed on long-term English learners, so we may see some improvement anyway. But one of the things that came from looking into this, I found this pretty interesting. I'm surprised that nobody brought it up before, is that the LTEL student group, particularly in elementary schools, based on the definition, was kind of, they had a certain bias in terms of the dashboard. So for LTELs in grades 6 through 8, they're primarily enrolled in either elementary schools, like a K-6, or in an elementary or unified school district, right? That's where they primarily appeared. In looking at the LTEL data, what they noticed was that LTELs for elementary schools and elementary districts, they might have been assigned, it may have been unfair. I would say they said inappropriate, but they assigned them to the elementary suspension 5x5, which has really low cut scores. And the problem is, if you don't even have LTELs appearing until 6th grade, you've got a very small denominator that's comprised almost exclusively of those kids who are now in adolescence and are more likely to act out, right? You don't have the benefit of having the K through 5 where you have far fewer suspensions. And so they are looking at coming back and giving a different, separately calculating the suspension rate on it using a different, like the middle school or the high school 5x5 just for LTELs, because it really was kind of skewed. It didn't seem to make a huge difference in terms of differentiated assistance. So, but I'm sure that some LEAs were impacted by that in combination with priority 4. So that they're probably going to come back and look for that. So the state board, again, they asked them to continue to analyze the data, particularly for suspension, and they asked the state board asked CD to explore a metric to accurately measure progress of LTELs without disincentivizing reclassification. And this is like $1 million question. Like, you don't want people to reclassify really soon because they don't want to have LTELs. At the same time, you don't want people to say, well, if we don't reclassify, then we have the benefit of some higher performing LTELs to buoy our scores, right? So that will be kind of an ongoing conversation, I would expect, because I do think that the number of districts that were impacted by the academic indicator was pretty striking. Okay, so this is the big one that I wanted to get to. The last one wasn't a big one, but the consideration around science on the dashboard, this is like kind of was a bit of a unusual in the sense that how science would be reflected on the dashboard and what role it might play in determining differentiated assistance, LCFF eligibility. And usually you have a clear idea of where the state board is leaning on these things, or you hear the comments being made by people in the audience and you get a sense, okay, it seems like the pressure is going to, in this case, it was all over the place. It was very unclear. So one of the things that came out of the conversation that started in March, well, actually there are several different options. So they proposed that, you would add science as an indicator, as a state indicator, for one of the 8 state priority areas. So it could go in priority 4, which is where you've got your pupil achievement. And one of the things, I've mentioned this before, but they can't call it an academic indicator, which is kind of a technical thing, but the state's ESSA plan identifies the academic indicators as ELA and math. And if they're not going to reopen the ESSA plan, they can't start calling science the academic indicator. And so the way the ESSA plan is written, they couldn't throw it in there as like, oh, now we're looking at 3 indicators together. It would be kind of a separate, kind of like the ELPI is separate within that priority area. They could also include it as priority 7, which is access to a broad course of study. So that would be another consideration. Put it in as a different priority area, its own standalone indicator. They could add science as a local indicator. So that could go under any, and that's something that you would, just like the local indicators you do now, you would reflect on it annually, right? And that actually came up as a recommendation from AXA. So I think that was why, that was kind of a wild card, right? So the consideration around science not being a state indicator was kind of a surprise. And then it could potentially be used for not be used for LCFF eligibility, just be used for information purposes. And you've got a wide range of opinions around this. So the CDE is going to provide simulations in the July meeting on the different impacts. If you added it here, what would happen? If you added it here, what would happen? So I wanted to throw this up. This is our overall end of year survey, but I included a question. I would love to get your feedback on what your thoughts are. So I'm going to give you the link to our survey. You can wait to fill out the rest, about the quality of our presentation. But just so you have this in front of your mind, I'd love to get some information from you, what you think would be the best outcome. So the state board gave, like I said, they did want to see more information. They want to see the simulated impact, but they also talked about a phase in. So this, I think the survey includes a 4th option, which is a hybrid. So it would start off as a local indicator, then move to a state indicator at a designated time in the future. And the state board really wanted to know, what does this mean for the LCAP? Primarily if you're red, because we'll still see colors next year in 2025, the upcoming dashboard colors for science. What does that mean for the LCAP in terms of the requirement to speak to any indicator for which you received red or a student group received red? So these are all things that are going to be hashed out in July. And that'll be interesting to see the outcome. But if you share your information with me, I'll forward it. I mean, it seems like it's up for grabs at this point. If you have any thoughts, we'd be happy to share your information with the CDE and see if they end up picking a side. They really don't seem to be interested in picking a side right now. There is a proposed change to DAS criteria. This does not affect most of our school districts because they're primarily schools like continuation schools are defined in Ed Code are automatically identified as DAS, but this does apply to DAS charter schools and alternative schools of choice. And so the state, previously there was a process for submitting a request, and this is for any school that has a 70% or more of like high need students, like foster youth, or they have a whole list of students who are credit deficient, all these things. So the state moved to collecting data, to validate this, to make it more accurate. And as they dove in, they discovered, oh boy, there's actually not a lot of data. For instance, how do you identify a student as credit deficient? What criteria do you use? Where do we find that in CALPADS? So it creates this little bit of a problem, and it's of particular interest to charter schools, because if you are identified as a DAS charter school, you're not subjected to the performance categories, which have an impact on reauthorization or renewal of your charter. So that's a big impact. And so there's a lot of charter schools could be impacted if they can't meet the criteria for DAS because they don't. So keep an eye on this one if you're a charter school. It's unclear. They changed the collection to cumulative enrollment and what impact that had. So the state board wanted more data about that. Also, how do you determine credit deficient students? It's really, can we pick a point in time where we say the student is a semester behind, a year behind? So these are all interesting conversations that they're having. The final one, this was a priority 1 local indicator. So in Ed Code, it did indicate that this priority, it's transformed over the last couple of years. And on the screen, what you see is how it looks currently, where you're reporting on your percentage of clear teachers within your LEA. What this Ed Code had added was this provision that you are also supposed to show disparities across school sites. And so there is a push from some advocates that they wanted to see this on the dashboard, but how that would appear is not 100% clear. So this is something the state board will take up. And so one of the things that they've proposed is there would be this teachers tile on district and school homepage separate from the priority 1 tile. They also could add a view more details link, which we've seen for like the growth data, that would open a new table that'll provide this intra-district comparison. And the concern is that there's like, we're already seeing this if you go to Data Quest, right? This is kind of redundant. So this is what they were being asked to include. And you just don't want it to get, that when you open it up, that it looks really messy. So the SARC already has that information. So it doesn't affect the SARC. This is strictly for the dashboard. So these are some other things that they said, they got from the field, the CDE. So they're going to share, adding an optional narrative box for this data to provide some local context. So you can imagine if you have all your schools listed someplace and you see like, wow, that high school, that continuation school only has 40% of their teachers are clear. Well, there may be a reason, and it's allowed under the teacher commissioning, but it doesn't meet the federal requirements. So they want to be able to say the reason this school does not meet, is so low is because of we're exercising the local assignment option, right? So those are some things that they need to adjust for. Like I said, they're concerned that there's some redundancy with the TAMO data, which, by the way, the TAMO data should be out around the same time at the end of June. Never great timing, but that's just how long it takes. So we expect it end of June, beginning of July, but that's as soon as they're going to get it. And then also the fact that they're limiting the fields that are showed to clear and not including out of field or intern assignments. So expect more. CDE will be conducting more outreach, and they will be bringing this in front of the CPAG group in June, which is kind of another advisory group for the dashboard. So I'm going to stop there for processing and questions. Stephen or Devin, would you feed me some questions?
What option 2 look like, which was science as a local indicator? What might that look?
So, that's a great point. So science is a local indicator. I should have touched on this. If science is added as a local indicator, first of all, it's too late to go on the 2025 dashboard as a local indicator as such, because they didn't have a self-reflection tool like all the other local indicators already have that have been approved by the board. So it would just appear, you'd still see the colors and everything. It would be up there. It just wouldn't be, it wouldn't have any impact on eligibility or anything. It would just appear there kind of. So I would imagine moving forward, it would be a self-reflection process. You'd look at your data, you'd say, what do we notice? Oh, we notice that, our performance is not great at the high school. And so we may need to revisit our, how we conduct, maybe even looking at when we assess in high school, or do we want to add a third-year requirement for science? Because, or, there's a lot of factors that go in it, but it'd be just like any other local indicator where it's just a matter of reflecting on it. It doesn't really factor in whether that number goes up or down, or whether it goes from red to orange or from, green to yellow. That's not a fact. I mean, it's something you should talk about, but it's not going to factor into eligibility. And then I think the prospect of having it do a hybrid would be, first, we could have a year of people getting used to that, let's talk about science. And I think there's a lot of concern that even though the science standard has been out there, that they haven't been actively, until it appears on the dashboard, nobody's paying that close of attention. And now that it is on there, people are like panicking. And so give districts and charter schools an opportunity to like prepare a little more time to like weigh in, like, what is our practice? How are we administering, or how are we getting to science? I think the big concern, like in elementary schools, is it gets crowded out of the day, right? And it can't all fall on the 5th grade teacher, because that's the grade level at which it's taught, right? So there'd be conversations to, improve the overall administration, or the overall access to the science content.
Do you know when we can anticipate data for misassigned and fully credentialed teachers in data class?
So the question is, when can we get the teacher data for misassigned and miscredentialed teachers? That is the teacher assignment monitoring outcomes data. Like I think I just mentioned, that we should expect that at the very end of June, or as soon as July. So that's about as quick as they can get it. They get it back from the California Teacher Commissioning after your data goes through the whole process of assignment monitoring with the county. Then they get this data file, and then they have to step in. The CDE has to apply all these federal definitions. It's a very long and cumbersome process, and not very helpful when it comes to the LCAP either. All right. Yeah, David.
In about the effect DAS status, DAS status has on charter renewal? Can you state that?
Yeah, so the question is, what effect was DAS status have on charter renewal? So since the determination around performance categories, it's published annually, that's had a big effect, because if you end up in the low performance category, it's a presumed denial or non-renewal for a charter. And so if a school is identified as DAS, they are not in that calculation. So they're removed from, they aren't subjected to that immediate, non-renewal factor. So for existing DAS schools and potentially some other DAS schools who may be looking at like, gosh, our population is getting close to that 70%, or who consider that, any change in the criteria that they feel like might push them out, and it gives them greater jeopardy, I think. So there's a lot of concern around that.
There are two additional questions. Daniel Felix writes, I heard expected rate of reclassification will need to be on initial annual parent notifications. I'm curious to know how CDE wants LEAs to represent rate. Do they want ratio, percentage, or something else?
Do you want to, can you add?
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that I can provide a lot.
So apparently, so this is something that the Title I or the compensatory ed reviewers have been asking for to see during FPM reviews. And so they're putting out rate of reclassification, and there's some language that comes from ESSA that sort of lays that out. I think some people are interpreting it to be like, at what rate are you reclassifying? Like, what's your reclassification rate, right? And some are determining rate to mean, like, is it the approximate number of years that it might take for a student to reclassify? So I think that there's got to be some discussions around this. We earlier this year in the MOS unit did have a discussion with our state and federal programs unit about what it might mean, but I think I'll make a note and sort of reopen that discussion, because the knowledge about this is really coming from during FPM reviews. It wasn't really on anybody's radar, and now the FPM reviewers for compensatory ed are like, we want to see this, we need to see this in your initial and annual parent notifications. I can find and post some of the language. I think we sent out a reminder last week around it, or have it on your radar last week around it. And so I'll post it in the chat, the language.
Thank you, Devin. It's always good to have our colleagues jump in, the experts in the field. I'll also include, when you send that, because we do have in our LCAP required metrics guide, and this is always a question, like, when is the CDE going to publish the reclassification rate? It hasn't been updated on DataQuest since 2021. And I will tell you, just from a meeting last week I was in, that they said it's not statutorily required. So it keeps getting pushed down the list because they have these other things that they have to produce. And so we have a guide that we've conferred with the CDE is an accurate representation of how to calculate your own reclassification rate using CALPADS reports. And I think David, who's in the room, actually added a little insight to that, to one of the reports, like, oh, should we apply this filter or not? So we have a detailed explanation. It does work. So even if you're just trying to figure out what is our straight up reclassification rate, we do have that information, and we'll add a link for that as well.
Two additional questions. I was under the impression that CDE completes the priority 1 data in the local indicators. Is that the case, or have I missed something?
No, that is correct. It's automatically populated, and that's and they didn't bring it up this year. It'll continue to be the expectation. I should have added this. The expectation is that you will take your local indicators to your board, your governing board, in whatever you have. So you will not have in all likelihood, unless your meeting is like the very end of June, you will not have the TAMO data. So you should just take it to the board without the TAMO data, and then come back at the first possible meeting with that TAMO data. Again, as it should be a public meeting. It can't be a consent item. It just needs to be shared with your board. Here's this data, because that will automatically populate on the dashboard along with this additional requirement.
Is there somewhere this, I'm sorry, I was wanting to ask a question, because I mean, you feel odd taking something to the board in an open meeting and there's missing data.
I think we addressed it. Yeah, the question is there any guidance or anything as to how to take it to the board. I know we talked about this at earlier with our LCAP team, because we did a presentation in February around the local indicators. And we have some guidance about how to present that, like, and I think we did the same thing last year, that this data is forthcoming, we'll bring it back to you. But yeah, you don't want to submit any like other data. You can't because it'll be automatically populated. You want to contradict what the state data says in your presentation. But yeah, but we did have something, so we'll make a note to add that to share out in the follow-up.
Just some information to provide to the board, because our meeting's June 9th.
Okay.
Right? So, I'd like to have something in their packet that explains the state process so that they can rest easy.
Yeah, well, for sure. We definitely had that come up last year. Another question.
All right, for the purposes of the LCAP metrics, do you suggest that we continue reporting percent met exceeded on CAST or on the 25-26 LCAP, or rather than the DFS as recently reported on the 2024 dashboard?
That's a great question. If I'm always one to say go with the consistency. If you've already got that metric identified, but you have the freedom to change a metric. So now that you'll have distance from standard as an option, you can, it's allowable to make that change, and just to be transparent about it, why you might choose it. And remember, it's not called DFS. I should have said it's called science points this year. They're trying to make a clean break, right? So it's not to be conflated with the academic indicators. Science indicator has science points, and those science points may actually be better for you to report than the percentage met or exceeded, because they're all a little more positive framed. So it's a consideration, and you are allowed to make that change.
Is there talk to having the dashboard metrics released prior to the reporting of percents proficient?
The question in the room is,
Short circuits the dashboard.
right, so
the dashboard comes out, nobody's paying attention.
yeah, the question is there a talk, well, to releasing the indicators for the dashboard earlier than the CAASPP and CAST release. Actually, next year they'll be released simultaneously. So it'll be, and that's part of the reason they're asked to be moved up. Also the fact that they can be more relevant to the conversation around the LCAP. But October 15th of 2026, it's just going to be a flurry of data dropping all at the same time. So the dashboard and the CAASPP and LPAC results will all go public on the same day. So I feel sorry for Roy, who's our data guy. He's going to be overwhelmed for a solid month after that. But yeah, so everything that will at least make the conversation. All right. Well, I've got some CALPADS and data updates. Hopefully I don't overwhelm anybody with this, and then we'll take a little break. So here's a cool thing. I just wanted to share this. If you may recall from last summer, and I'm going to plug this now, and then we'll give you updates. But last summer, our friends at SCOE created these cool tools where you could take the TOMS data file for CAASPP or LPAC and drop it into this spreadsheet, and it creates a dashboard with all these fun slicers and everything. And there's some caveats, we had to work with people to clean it up, but it's pretty cool. So they have this new tool this year. This is the first one out. They're updating the other ones as we speak. But this will take your TOMS file for CAST, and it'll convert your scale scores into science points. Okay, so this will give you a kind of a preview of what your, for your individual schools, what your science indicator may look like. Now, it does not, and we know what the cut scores are now because those were approved in March. So you'd have to go back and look, but it'll give you like an average for various schools. It'll give you the average science points. And so then you would be able to know, oh, what are we looking at for this year for where we would fall on the science indicator. It doesn't calculate participation rate or the assignment of lowest obtainable scale score, which for science is largely just, I think it's like kind of like LPAC. If however many students are below, you add that student to the denominator, not in the lowest obtainable scale score for the numerator. So they are, though, updating those CAASPP and LPAC/LP Excel dashboards. As soon as those come out, we'll let you know. They're fun, and we're happy to help. Maybe we'll do office hours to walk you through loading that data. They do give you a pretty good preview, and a lot of people enjoy using those to talk to their schools during the summer. They can take some preliminary looks at what your dashboard looks like. So those are pretty handy. Then there are these new data quest reports that just dropped last week. So annual enrollment dropped. English learner, all the English learner reports without the reclassification rate, unfortunately. But your LTEL and Ever EL reports also dropped. Special ed enrollment by setting, free and reduced price meal reports, classified staff reports, and estimated teacher hire reports. So those are all brand new and were out last week. So there's a lot of new data there. We already used it for a project. And then coming, and so they have to get that enrollment data out first, and then they are able to calculate this, the data file. This is the LTEL and at risk of LTEL student level data file that's released every year per Ed Code 313.1. This is a different, and this is coming out in the Student Online Accountability Reporting Record Status source. Should be out sometime soon. Now that they have the main data file, they'll put this up. And this is different than the 52052 definition that's we use for the dashboard. But if you're using this for your letters that go out as required by Title III, this will tell you who you need to notify of LTEL and at risk of LTEL. And then they have this great site. You can look at the difference between the two calculations and where it shows up differently. It's pretty handy. Also, though, this is important, I think, for folks to know, CALPADS is moving to have greater visibility around the LTELs based on the definition of 52052, which is a much more straightforward. It's like 7 years, and it's like 2,577 days after initial identification as an English learner, or initial enrollment in U.S. schools, whichever was earlier. A student is identified as an LTEL for the purposes of the dashboard. But you could also use this list for your LTEL report out. It's a broader, so it catches more students because it doesn't include other things. But they have two reports that are out, 15.1 and 15.2, that have been added a filter for LTELs. So these are your cohort outcomes. These are graduation and college career indicator. You can look at who your LTELs are going to be in that dashboard. But they've also added this cumulative enrollment extract that you can pull out of CALPADS now. So if you wanted to know who these students were, the most important thing is it includes a provisional LTEL start date for students. So it actually will project into the future students who aren't yet LTELs but will be. We played around with the file a little bit. It's a text file, but you can convert it. In some cases, I'm sure there's student information systems that are already set up to be able to import this. But it'll be helpful for identifying students who are currently LTELs based on your current enrollment. And over the dashboard, it looks at cumulative enrollment. And then moving next year, they're going to have new LTEL filters for all the end of year data, which will be even more handy. But this enrollment extract should be helpful, at least initially, in helping you identify those students who are LTELs based on the new definition. If you understand this reference, you know what I'm talking about. All right, you're old enough to recognize Steve Martin. The new phone books are here. So there is a new CALPADS to the Dashboard handbook that's out, and it makes me excited, right? But this is handy. This is for looking for the 2025 dashboard. You can use this if you're a CALPADS or an accountability coordinator. You can use this to review your CALPADS data and make sure it's accurate, get a prediction on what your dashboard is going to look like. It provides specific reports, what they look like, how to walk through the step-by-step process for looking at these, and guidance for areas in which you want to focus your attention. So it's pretty handy. Once you start really populating and getting cleaner data, you can use this guide to have some conversations around your data. And then just in terms of the end of year deadlines, there is I mentioned the August 15th cohort poll. The August 8th is the close of the amendment window, which is really the end. But the August 15th is when they pull the data from CALPADS for your graduates, right? So important to know, if you have summer grads, these are the students who end the school year short of credits, but they go and take a summer school class or adult ed, or you've got a summer school program. There is a process in place. It's outlined. This came up previously. It's outlined in Flash 274, which is in Canvas. But you just have to have enrollment during that window before they graduate. Before that August 15th, you have to have a one-day enrollment to make sure you capture them. All right, very good. So there is this gap that I talked about. And by the way, all your CALPADS administrators know this information. I just wanted to be on, if you're in charge of the dashboard, to make sure that you have access to this. So there is this gap between the deadline for the amendment window, August 8th, and then the August 15th ODS poll. So there could be some discrepancies. And there's a process in place for those students who may not get captured in the end of year submission for the 1-year data, but they can be collected for the ODS poll. So if you have students completing, it could be like, for instance, the dual enrollment course, right? So that they may miss the deadline because the timing of it comes in and it's beyond that August 8th deadline, but you can still catch it in time to be submitted for your college career indicator. So this is the process. I don't want to dive into the details, but just know it exists and it's all outlined, and they went over this last week at the CALPADS regional meeting, but I wanted anybody who's an accountability coordinator to be aware of this. And then I included this because if you were able to join us, we had the statewide leadership series. It was really aimed at, for CALPADS, not for CALPADS administrators, but rather for folks who might have some ancillary roles supporting CALPADS submissions. And I've got a link in here and I'll include it in Canvas. They'll just take you to some of the resources. It's really targeted for folks who don't speak CalPadian. And so there's a lot of good stuff in here, including some recordings that are available to go through how should we be looking at our end of year data that will help support that process. So that's the last of the data questions. Are there any questions in the chat, Stephen?
Yeah, there's a couple. What was the October drop date? Do you know what that refers to?
The October drop date, not.
Uh,
Oh, the October 15th, that's for the LCAP. That's the opening of the LCAP submission window to upload to the dashboard. I think that might be.
Danielle writes for data. She was the originator of the question. Drop date for data. So there's the.
Oh, the October 15th, the dashboard in 2026.
Oh,
October 15th will be both the dashboard release as well as the CAASPP and ELPAC release.
and Beth writes, I haven't used SOARS. Does this data differ from DataQuest?
The SOARS data is student level data. So that's where they release a student level data file with students ID. So it does differ in that you can actually know who to notify. This is a requirement of Ed Code 313.1 that you notify students who are in that file. You can take a more expansive definition. So a lot of districts have taken just to notifying any student, kind of more in line with the dashboard definition. If a student's been with you for 7 years, you just automatically identify them. But that data file is, strictly speaking, the kids who are LTELs and at risk of LTELs who must be notified. So you can if you go out earlier with the letters or producing them earlier, it's always easier to go wider and cast a wider net. But the ones who are mandated are in that student level data file. Any other questions?
No, just a clarification that that was referring to LTEL data. That's it.
Okay. Let me bring up a couple of last things and we'll take a break. So professional learning, this new data leadership series, training opportunity, CDE is producing this. I've participated, it's actually WestEd pulls this together. I've participated for the last 4 years in it. And I'm participating again this year. This is exceptionally good content, I will say. I highly recommend it. It's a series that takes place the end of June. It shifts up every year a little bit. And so they always have good information about how to interpret the data, how to look at the data, and how to communicate the data. And so if you're tasked this summer with communicating data to your LEA, whether it's principals or teachers or parents or the board, I highly recommend this. And then that final session is a data leadership shared practice panel, and our own Sarah Nitsos was on it in previous. So you know the quality of those folks is great, really high. So it's worth a look, and they always record it. If you can't make any of these, if you're taking a vacation, you can always watch these later. It's good stuff. If you guys want to get your hands dirty with Excel, our friends from, I think this is someone from Fresno County pulled this together as part of the California Educational Research Association. It's a hands-on Excel webinar using Excel to build interactive dashboards. So it might be interesting. It's a very short 10 to 11:15. I'm going to drop in just to see what they have. But it's, if you use Excel, you might learn a few new tricks. If you don't use Excel, you might be excited because there's lots that we can do with Excel to build some cool dashboards. They have dropped the dates and the registration for our annual assessment and accountability information meetings. This is the AIM meetings. Last year it was 3 days. This year they've reduced it down to 2. You'll notice that they are, the emphasis on the August 7th is assessment. So it's a little bit longer. It's 2.5 hours. And then August 14th is our accountability session from 2 to 4. So those are the 2 days, and there's registration available. You can use the links there. And then finally, if you're not a member, you don't have to be a member of the CERA. This is, I just mentioned their upcoming thing. They have a convention in November 3rd through 5th in Riverside. It's a great opportunity if you're an administrator, if you're a testing coordinator. You see kind of across the board. The state's usually represented there in some capacity. We've presented there in the past. We presented about science last year. Science on the dashboard and how to interpret that data. But there's always lots of interesting things there, and it's great. And this year it's pretty close. It's in Riverside. Last year it was in San Francisco, so a little more accessible maybe this year. And then do you have the CAC one? Because it's later in the month. It's always a competition. If you go to one presentation, there's California Assessment Conference in November too. But CERA comes first, and depending on your role, you might find this more relevant. And now let's take a 5-minute break. Let's take a 6-minute break. It's 10:04. Let's take a whopping 6-minute break. If you're at home, stretch a little bit, and we'll come back with Stephen and assessment.
All right, let's look at some assessment updates here for May as we are closing the testing season. There are completion rates that were announced to us via RAN as of May 12th, so a little bit dated now. So as of May 12th, which would be a few weeks out, and so it looks like there is the most significant gap in summative alternate ELPAC in terms of the ELPAC assessments. If you still have summative alternate ELPACs to complete, I would look into those at your LEA to see how many of your total cumulative total completed are contributing to that gap between 100% and that 75%. Of course, it will be higher as of today. Same thing with CAS completion rates. If you look here, the lowest would be the CAA for science. The CSA being a non-required test, an optional test that you can use electively, is the completion rate is not relevant to accountability or is not subject to that 95% threshold, but you can see a significant gap between the CAA for science, CAA for mathematics, CAA for ELA, and the total completion rate that we'd expect at the end of the year. A little bit higher for ELA and math. These are also as of May 12th, so should have come up significantly since that point. And of course, you would want to look into your TOMS or your TIDE Cambium completion statuses and pull those on a daily, weekly basis. Make sure that your principal site coordinators are engaged and doing that. If you're not one of the LEA coordinators, request that from your LEA coordinator or make yourself one. Have your superintendent designate you as an LEA coordinator. If you have been looking, you may have noticed that summative ELPAC, summative alternate ELPAC, ELA, Math, Smarter Balanced, CAST, all have dropped. Those are partial drops, of course. We have some of our LEAs in LA County that have received 90% of their SSRs already, and so if you are part of the process for delivering data for reclassification, that criteria 1 data that might be necessary. If you are part of that criteria 4 state test option, and that data is now available for many students. Not all students will have all data available. If you tested earlier or later, that will affect your results. Although the K through 2 writing answer booklets do cause those to be delayed further than other assessments. We've heard reported from the field that the K through 2 are coming back quite quickly after delivery, so that if you are using, and you should, a continuous return process, you're returning your materials as they're being completed over the course of each a week or each 2 weeks, you will have earlier results available for your reclassification decisions here in the school year prior to summer. And we'll talk in a few minutes about some of the implications for summer and some resources for understanding how that might affect your data delivery. There were some technical revisions to the level 1 improvement achievement level descriptors for smarter balanced summative assessments in English language arts literacy. It's a one-word change, which means effectively that it's reiterating the knowledge we had at the last Board of Education meeting, which is next year the revisions should continue to those achievement level descriptors. We won't see those until the next year, and of course they could not be provided for the current year's results, as those have already been released. So these are all 25-26 results, and those achievement level descriptors are being slightly revised here as we're moving along towards next year. So ELA and math both getting a second iteration of the word minimal changed to limited. So very minimal changes here as it changes to limited. Also, there's some next steps that's going to include focus groups, interest holders recommending some descriptions of what knowledge and skill students demonstrate on assessments, and what actions educators, families, and students may take. You know, if you've been looking at some of the new additions to the student score reports, that embedded in those student score reports are not just links to the Starting Smarter website, but also links to the Lexile Quantile website. Both of those, Starting Smarter is going to give parents an understanding of the assessment, and Lexile Quantile is going to give some links to resources to books that are leveled for Lexile levels. A lot of information. Also, adjustment to the language on that guidance on what next steps could be for parents. So in terms of next steps to support student progress, each of those achievement level descriptors are associated with a suggested next step statement that should define that progress. Updates on national and international assessments. We've had a lot of questions from the field on this. Presumably because there was some action on NAEP High School. Grades 4 and 8 in math and reading will be testing in 2026. That would be the normal cycle. Grade 8 civics and US history will generate national results only. That means you won't have school level results. Grade 4, 8, 12 pilot tests in math and reading, and the results will be used to improve NAEP, but not publicly released. And then you'll have district and school notifications on who is expected to test. That's planned for June 2025, just coming up next month. PISA, 15 students assessed in math, reading, and science literacy, and then expecting results in 2026. Are those assessments required? Math and reading assessments in grades 4 and 8 are required and are tied to Title I compliance. So if you'd like to go through that, there's some additional information on this slide. There's going to be a few changes to CAA for science in 25-26. There's going to be 3 embedded performance tasks. Previously, there were 4, 3 domains, and each of those domains are going to, those 3 embedded performance tasks associated with one of 3 domains. Those 3 domains will have additional questions, 15 instead of 10. Each of those will address one of the 3 areas addressed in the science areas that are reported: Earth and Space, Life Science, Physical Sciences, and survey questions are going to be removed at the end of each performance task. This is just the CAA for science. ETS, this is something that happens at the end of every testing season, and it happened this year as well. Of course, there are places for feedback on the CAASPP ELPAC website, but there is a survey out currently. If you did not get the coordinator email to ask you for your input, there's a link in the slide. Those are due by May 30th. It makes a difference. Your input makes a difference and makes things better for everyone. Return completed summative ELPAC K through writing. This is just a reminder that there's a deadline of a last day for pickup for in June 13th, 2025. So that's the last day to return your K through 2 writing domain materials for K through 2, which is the written portion. You're going to want to make sure you're preparing for SSR electronic distribution. There's 2 links here, one to the email from ETS and one on the reference guide on how to prepare for that. You're going to want to make sure that your reports are properly displayed for parents and that they're only received by parents of their own children. Make sure your credentials are up to date, and make sure your system is linked to TOMS, your student information system. Your parent portal is linked to TOMS. Yeah.
My first full year doing assessment, what is the window for preparing for electronic distribution? I'm sure there's an out time we have to have done that by.
You should have done it before.
Repeat the question.
Oh, yes. So the question is, what's the window for preparation for SSR distribution? A great resource for understanding expectations in terms of timelines and what I should be doing from month to month is the coordinator checklist. There's 2 different coordinator checklists. They'll refer to this particular question, and that is the technology coordinator checklist and the LEA coordinator checklist. So both of those great resources. I would recommend that this had been done a few months ago, and the reason being, you want to have it ready you want to ensure that it is the credentials are connecting to TOMS prior to the point at which they should be delivering the first SSRs. So whenever you see this this timeline here, which says, okay, we're going to have some coming out in late May. Great time to make sure that TOMS credentials are updated. Oftentimes you'll see, strangely enough, those credentials expire once every 12 months. So let's say you updated in May last year in order to make sure that they were available for SSR distribution. Well, so they're right at the time they might expire again if somebody did it right on time. So good thing to check maybe a month before SSR release. If you are using the link between SIRS, not SIRS, SACE and TOMS for delivering accommodations and designated supports for students with an IEP, then that's also the same credentials. And so if that is functional, then you should be functional on SSRs. Once SSRs drop, once you have results, it's a great practice to go in and make sure that parents can receive those results. Oftentimes there's a way to view in your SIS those same SSRs. If it's coming off of Amazon Web Services, the file, the PDF, then it is functional for you. Although there's multiple different ways to see student results. You might be in TOMS, you might be in SIRS, you might be, I guess those are the two other ways. Those don't necessarily mean that it's linked up via the parent portal.
It's not something we're pushing out to them, it's something we're ensuring is available through the parent portal.
That's right. You're ensuring it's, yeah, there's an email that says, check this and make sure that you've got this set up. And in fact, it will, oftentimes it'll require that you input a code, a secret into your SIS, and you pull that out of, you're going to pull that out of TOMS, that code, that secret. So many times our LEA coordinators are not our SIS system managers, and it'll take a 2-person team. You're going to work with your SIS person and make that happen. If you're both, then you can just do it. Okay, I don't want to apparently, yeah.
So, it's 20 working days for CAS, 30 days for ELPAC to send them out to families. Since they're rolling out and getting distributed on different, or getting them on different days, is there a way to see exactly when each one was like added to TOMS?
It's in TOMS.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it like, is there a specific report? Because that's what I.
Yeah. So the question in the room, I should just have you repeat the question, but I'll try to paraphrase, is given the rolling release of score reports, is there any way to know the timeline for notification as to when something was received? And another of our in-person members says it's in TOMS. So Stephen, do you want to address as well?
Yeah, I want to give Eric a mic, because Eric had one of the most robust resources that we've seen for tracking the release of this, that he introduced at another DAAN meeting a few years ago, or it may have been Wednesdays at 1. I wonder if you would describe that.
So what I do for the release is there's a report in TOMS. I don't have my device right with me because it's charging, but there's a report in there that shows exactly what day that individual student report was released. And then you can do one of a couple of things. You can release emails to parents and say, hey, this is now available to you in little batches, so that you can meet that timeline. Then what I do for my situation, we have Power School, and I am able to send out those emails, and then I can pull a report of what emails were opened, and then I can resend that message to parents again and again until they either get it, or usually after the third time, I print it and mail it. But that way I know that it's been sent and that I've done everything I can to make sure that they've been notified that that is available to them, with the instructions on how to access that through our student portal.
Hello and good morning, everybody. This is your Region 11 Success Agent, Marcus, here on Zoom. So that was the SSR availability report that Eric may have been referring to. You can actually pull that report to see when those student score reports become available within TOMS. So I think that's the report he was referring to as well.
Thanks, Marcus. Could you answer
Sure.
the other question? I think Molly had dropped in the chat a question about they're not receiving score reports. They say it is an issue with ETS that is global, at least Power School.
We're not aware of any as far as importing those electronically. You might want to double check with the SIS vendor as well. If you can actually regenerate credentials within TOMS again, and then provide the new secret key to them just to see if they're able to have that information flow into their SIS system. But we're not aware of any global issues as far as and specifically with Power School or any other importers at this time. So I would definitely double check that they have, if the credentials aren't working, try regenerating those credentials and then giving the secret key to them just to see if there's any changes that occur. I would definitely double check on that.
Just so you know, we have tried all of those things,
Mhm.
and we reached out to Power School, and lots of other Power School users are having the same issue, and Power School confirmed that it's an ETS issue.
Okay. I'll let my team know about that. I wasn't aware of that, so.
Marcus, I actually tested our connection today, and it is working for both of our school sites, and the reports are not coming up.
Okay, I'll double check with the team here. I hadn't heard that yet, as far as I know. So thanks for letting us know. We appreciate that. I'll see if I can gather any further information on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and we have one more person who validated that, but like you said,
Okay. I will double check with my team right now here. Let's see if as soon as I get any information during the duration of the meeting, I can let you all know.
all right. Thank you, Marcus.
Mhm.
Appreciate it.
Great, thanks. I imagine, Eric, does doing it that detailed of a level of one by one, any student, any SSR, or any parent who has not accessed their email, does that trigger a next step with your enrollment and the side of the house that deals with phone numbers and addresses and contact information for parents? Does it trigger them to update or potentially look for updates?
Until the students return for the next.
So it's an annual process of, yeah. All right, training. Well, not to reiterate a parent myth that I corrected myself with just recently, but on the Golden Gate Bridge does not get painted back to forth and start over again once they finish. They assess what needs to be done and then paint it. But similarly, the fact that we have to do ELPAC initial training again this year means that things are getting better, right? Things are getting better. That means the test is changing. So assessment is changing. So you'll need to make sure that you are having every retrain, every recalibrate, and you also need, as the LEA coordinator, to yourself or have somebody do the LEA certification for the initial alternate initial LPAC the initial alternate LPAC administration and scoring training has been available since May 7th, and you should get in the system. Make sure you have that AST email with a key. Get your Moodle keys and complete that, the LEA certification. All right, moving on to reclassifying and reporting RFEP students during summer. There's an update flash number 300. This is going to be one of those things that's officially in the wheelhouse of CALPADS, but you need to know about as an assessment coordinator, because you're going to need to bring together your EL coordinator, yourself, and CALPADS on the same page in understanding what the effects of reclassifying during summer are and how you are going to address dates of reclassification. There is a whole spreadsheet on update flash 300. It just reiterates flash 277 from last year and updates it for the current year. There is another details email, from 5/21 from the 21st of this month on reclassified student aggregate reporting. I'm not going to go through the details of that, but also the effects of dates and reclassification and completion status of tests on what those reporting dates will look like. Excuse me, what the reclassified, the summary reclassified student rates will look like. Check that out. I'm going to ask our colleague Devin Guerra to go over this slide. This is about reclassification for duly identified students. That's students with an IEP. This is something that we've heard from multiple contexts, but I'll let Devin talk to it.
I'll come up here so my back's not to the to the camera. Yeah, the CDE, I mean, this has been reiterated sort of multiple times throughout the year. But as you know, the CDE came out with just clarified guidance around reclassification for duly identified students just clarifying that IEP teams may not modify criterion 1. So any student with an IEP needs to earn a 4 on the summative LPAC or a 3 on the summative alternate LPAC to then be considered for reclassification. All of the other local criteria remains locally decided as long as it meets the guidelines laid out on the CDE webpage and the reclassification criteria. I do want to uplift, so the CDE is just really trying to get this messaging out into the field. They asked us just last week to uplift the guidance again. So we sent out an email to our network, but it's great to uplift it through this network as well. I will say that one of the things that they didn't ask us to send out, but they did kind of let us know, the regional English learner specialists, was that they are kind of doing a data dive right now to identify which LEAs are still reclassifying students, with duly identified students, say with a 3 on the LPAC or without having earned a 4 on the LPAC or the 3 on the alt. And that what they find during that data dive could possibly inform FPM reviews coming up in this coming year or in future years. Right, so just to kind of have that on your radar to really make sure that your LEA is in compliance with not reclassifying any duly identified students unless they have met those that criterion 1, LPAC 4 summative or LPAC 3 alt. So that's basically it. I don't know if there's any questions about it. I can sit down and look in the chat, or if there's any concerns, you can always email me. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I know this is the type of thing we oftentimes will need in writing so that we can communicate it officially to another department. There is a link from a February 7th, 2025 letter, guidance letter on duly identified students in the slide. It's right here. And this would be an appropriate thing to provide to our colleagues. It looks like this. It's guidance on reclassified for duly identified students, and it reiterates this exact language. Some of the concern expressed was that some students had been reclassified in that data dive down to level 1 on the LPAC. Concern expressed that the instrument, the LPAC, for criteria 1 was not being utilized as intended. Also, Devin's email is on here, and the Multilingual Academic Support Unit email is on here on this slide if you would like to reach out to the MOS unit.
There is a question related to this before we move on. Gabriella asked, is February 7th considered to be the beginning of this updated policy? And I'm guessing, you know, if you've got FPM visit and they're looking at prior reclassification.
That's a good question, and I'll actually probably have to uplift that question at our next RELS meeting. The clarified guidance came from the CDE in August and was communicated to the field, you know, through the RELS and through other mechanisms, but the official letter sort of that went out was on February 7th. So that's a great question. I will uplift that. I do know that the ELFPM team was not issuing findings around that for this year. So anyone who had an FPM review this year, as they were working to sort of transition their processes to this, there was no findings around it. But it will factor in, I would say, for the next year's FPM reviews. And so what they're going to be looking for is that your processes that you've put in place for next year reflect this guidance, right? So let's say someone was reclassified in, you know, December with a 2 on the summative LPAC, you know, as long as you could show that you now have appropriate guidance in place so that that isn't happening anymore, there wouldn't be a finding around that, because findings are all about just, you know, showing that you've updated your systems and how you're doing things to meet compliance, right? So I will ask that question, but just know that as of now, moving forward, wherever you're at, right, that you can no longer reclassify any students who are duly identified or any student at all right? Unless they have achieved the 4 on the summative LPAC or the 3 on the alternate LPAC.
Okay, looking at criteria 1 eligible for reclassification, that would be a 4 on the summative LPAC or a 3 on the alternate LPAC. CD is also looking at the number of students who are eligible per criteria 1 and who have not reclassified. You may have gotten the Bob Martin emails about the list of students that are in your LEA that meet this this definition. The current number of students who are still eligible to be tested, are still eligible for reclassification by criteria 1, who have not been tested, are 3,611. You may have seen a few weeks ago an email that suggested, I think it was a CALPADS email that suggested it would be advisable to reclassify by the 15th. May 15th has passed, and we are very close to the end of the LPAC window. The end of the LPAC window, of course, on the 31st, the 30th functionally. It is any of those students who are still in EL and have not reclassified by that date and who have not tested will be part of your students on the list of students who did not test. So if they are intending to reclassify those students, best to do it today. All right, another email, another series of those series of Bob Martin emails. I affectionately call them Bob Martin emails because he usually signs these, and they are without question emails that proactively identify issues that we used to get as superintendent letters after the fact, after you couldn't do anything about it. So I really encourage you to check out those Bob Burton emails and do something about those issues because otherwise they'll be coming after you. So enter speaking scores into the DEI immediately after testing. I know it's a little bit like juggling for pencils or juggling for things at the same time. A lot of our LAs or a lot of our test examiners will choose to write down on paper the scores and then record them later. Also, they have a record of it, so if some weird technical glitch happened, they don't lose it into the ether. But being sure that you have part of your training process of making sure your scores are immediately input into the data entry interface after testing so they don't pile up in a pile and then get lost. There are numerous speaking scores that show completion in the testing, administration completion, but don't have scores entered in the DEI, that process that happens after administration. So make sure that that is happening. There is a link here to a list of SSIDs in LA County. I don't remember. I think the date of that drop is in there. The entry deadline is Saturday at 5 p.m. That's this Saturday. Of course, that means it's Friday or really today. So make sure that you're not on the list. If you're on the list, maybe those have been completed by now, but check that out. You will have gotten the, on the 15th, the ELPAC Test Materials Return to Instruction Certification list. That means, of course, that initial ELPAC will be a new test next year. That means unused initial ELPACs need to be thrown away. Via the process, you need to securely shred them or send them back and certify that. That means you also need to order new initial ELPACs if you have not done so yet. I think we're in a supplemental ordering window, so you can correct any oversight if that has not been done yet. There's a few tools, SIRS enhancements, and new features available live and in the sandbox. I'm going to, how much time do we got? We got time for this or we want to move along? Okay. So let's just look at a few of these things. These are a few resources on the slide, links out. Also, these are all reiterated here in the assessment updates section of the agenda here for DAAN. So you can link out to all these. San Diego County Office of Education, Aaron Gordon, our colleague there, dropped a video. SCOE ran has a handout, and then there's also a presentation and notes. I believe those this might be the same as that, or at least it was developed by the same group. So checking out some of these service features that have been enhanced. The summative ISR, that means the individual student report. Great tool for IEP team meetings, teacher-parent conferences, working with students on developing their understanding of expectations or building their goals. ISR has been refreshed in a way that gives more specific data for that assessment, is a little bit more accessible. A little bit, some highlights so that it's easier to see where you are. Domain calculations, domain totals now include all results for ELPAC domains, ELPAC composite calculations, included also a few bulk group actions that you can do. So you can take your groups in the group area of SIRS and assign them to, for example, yourself or a principal or someone additional, maybe a site EL coordinator, in addition to the uploads that have already been made. Let's say your system automatically will roster via teachers. You could assign those to an additional staff member, maybe a TOSA, maybe a principal. So updates to SIRS should make it a little bit easier. This is a little bit more detail. The handout, if you want more detail for any one of those. So check that out. That was developed by SCOE. And also a nice video by Erin Gordon. You might know her from SIRS trainings with our at the state level or the new coordinator trainings. Oops.
Even I think one of the
I lost myself.
one of the SIRS updates that I think was most interesting is that ability to download your current groups before the rollover. Did you already speak to that?
You can currently, so a great practice. So the rollover happens, and I believe this is something I asked Marcus about last week at Wednesdays at 1, and the date for the rollover of SIRS is not dropped yet. It's usually associated with a rollover or a system closure for SIRS and for the interim assessments. And it usually happens right around the beginning of August. Marcus, are you there? Did they update that date yet or no?
So there hasn't been any release yet. There will be an email that goes out to the field regarding that update of the rollover happening. So please make sure that you are downloading those files, as they, I believe, will not roll over for the next year, but I'm also going to address that in part of my presentation as well.
Yeah, those get wiped out. The
Yeah.
roster get wiped out every year.
Those student groups will get removed every year, and unless you obtain the original ones, either your site coordinator or your LEA coordinator uploaded, they have to be uploaded again in order for them to view last year's scores through SIRS.
So often your first experience of this will be, you know, August 15th in a return to school training, and you're having everybody log in and they'll not be able to access anything, and that will be frustrating. So load them because rosters won't be current. Last year's rosters won't be current for your current school year, but it is a great tool for you know, review, looking at what happened last year, looking at your prior years, especially at the beginning of the year, especially as a summer PD, especially as, you know, a retrospective on what we're looking at in curriculum for the coming year. All right, you probably received so look out for those. All the steps that you need to take to make sure that things are ready for the closing of your testing windows. You I'm gonna come back to that one. I'm gonna reiterate something that Evan talked about, the AAIM meeting. It's only a few hours, only 4 hours, so clearly not time for the 2018 karaoke, that happened at the last in-person. I think 2018 was the last in-person, wasn't it? But always very helpful. California Assessment Conference, November 12th through 14th, Riverside Convention Center. You are encouraged to present. Bring one of your teachers and submit a proposal. There's a link at the bottom to both the website for the conference for registration and for submission for a proposal. It's in Riverside. It's accessible to you. Submit a proposal. We'll be there. There is a meeting for charter schools assessment coordinators tomorrow. Be at that. There is the new coordinator training webinar series. Session 1 is June 12th. Register for that. And assessment has got several PDs upcoming that you are invited to, or you're invited to ask your teachers or ATOSAs or your admin to attend, and check out those as well. We'll have Wednesdays One Summer Fun returning a little bit later in August, Teacher Institute on Assessment, and a 4-part Administrator Institute, as well as a partnership with Special Ed and UDL for accessibility supports for all.
Well, before we go to this link, I think Marcus, did you say you had an update for us?
For what particular? Oh, for the Power School, you mean?
No, well, you mentioned you may have some updates today beyond Power School. I don't know, maybe I misinterpreted that.
So I did get an update via Power School. Some of the LEAs, I brought this up during this meeting, so I did confirm yes. Power School did reach out to us, and they're actually working with our Tom's team currently in order to import those SSRs as well. So thank you out there in the field of those who brought that to my attention. I did confirm that is correct. We are having a slight hiccup on our end regarding the SSRs, and Power School is working with our Tom's team directly to resolve that. The other updates I was mentioning were just a small, brief presentation, if there's enough time. If not, I can just go through the finer points.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay.
You want to take over sharing?
Sure, perfect. Give me one moment here. Hello again, and good morning, everybody. This is your Region 11 Success Agent, Marcus. Let me just share the screen here. We'll get started momentarily.
Power School, or is it beyond Power School?
It is just, I just confirmed, it is just only Power School at this time. There has been no any other LEAs that have reported this at the time. Everybody see my screen okay? Okay, perfect. So again, I am the Region 11 Success Agent, Marcus Betancourt. Hello and good morning, everybody. Just a couple of fine things to go over. So if you have anything regarding the manuals, or if you're looking for any information, definitely bookmark this page if you have it here. This has all of our manuals listed here. Online Test Administration manual, initial ELPAC, Summit of ELPAC, and so forth. So definitely use that as your first resource. And if you have any other questions, again, please feel free to email me, chat, or call. So this is on our specific site, and this is for the CAASPP and ELPAC coordinator specifically, the support. So as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, if you go to our CAASPP-elpac.org page, you can contact us directly or use our Get Answers system or utilize our chatbot, Anita, as well. If you have a more specific question for our chatbot, please feel free to, it should allow you to go to an agent directly just by typing in agent to the chatbot text box. So one thing I wanted to go over as we are winding down, this is just for the initial that will be ongoing. Again, please note that the 24-25 supplemental test materials order window, that is only available to the end of next Friday, June 6th. So please be aware if you have any LE or any students that still need a test for the initial or within their first 30 days of enrollment. If you require any test materials order, you can still place an order at this time. We do suggest if you need those materials a bit faster, as opposed to 10 to 14 business days, definitely work with our neighboring LEAs or your neighboring LEAs to see if they have any material that might be available or any unused booklets. That would be the first resource. If not, then you can still place the order. And then if you send a request to me as well, I'll see if that possibly that order can be expedited before the window closes for the initial LPAC. For the next administration year, for the 25-26 year, the primary test materials order window has closed. However, our initial LPAC supplemental test materials order window is currently open at this time and will be open until June 5th of next year. So please be aware of that. If you try to place a primary order, it will not allow you to because it has now closed, but you should still be able to place an initial LPAC supplemental test materials order at this time. So please note, this is a very important thing. This is the last week of summative LPAC testing. The window does close on May 31st. However, please note that May 31st is a Saturday. So if you're still planning on testing and using that full day, Success agents, along with the California Technical Assistance Center team, the representatives, we will not be available on Saturday. So any questions you may have, definitely try to get them in this week as well and try to reach us directly before Saturday. We will be available until 5 p.m. on May 30th, but again, we will not be available Saturday, so we'll be unable to troubleshoot and assist if anything might occur during your testing that takes place on Saturday, May 31st. Please note that all the answer booklets, they must be received by ETS no later than June 20th. So please ensure those materials are received in the time to be processed. Typically, when you receive or when you send those booklets out, once we receive them, and if you use our materials tracking lookup device, you can actually see outbound packages that are sent to with your materials to ETS for scoring directly. And once we receive them and we receive them at our shipping warehouse, it typically takes about a week to a week and a half in order for us to receive that and then score it and process it so that you have SSRs that are flowing in TOMS. And just make sure as well, have all the answer books picked up by UPS and a shipment delivered by June 13 at the latest, please. So here's something I want to go over just briefly regarding the reports and some reports you may need for next year. So during our rollover, which happens for both CAASPP and ELPAC, typically these reports are no longer made available for the previous year. There's actually an email we send out before every rollover for CAASPP and ELPAC, letting LEA coordinators know that they should download these reports prior to that rollover, because once the rollover occurs and we are officially in the new administration year, you will not have access to those reports anymore, just so you know. So that includes the completion status report and the completion status summary report, a user list report, have all your users there listed, student test settings report, and then this is the big one I come across every year. If there's any educational audits that are going on in your LEAs, please make sure that you're downloading the signed security forms. And these reports, again, are all in TOMS. And that's going to allow you, the last report there, the signed security forms, will allow you to actually download the PDFs directly of those users who signed that. So as we get again closer to the end of the summative LPAC window and you're trying to verify completion within your LEA, this is an exact report that you can use to actually, oh, sorry, I apologize. This is the security forms and remote administration status report. I apologize. So this report is going to allow you to check your users to ensure that they've completed and submitted the signed security forms that go along with the roles they've been assigned. So if you have any as we keep going with the CAASPP windows and the end of the summative LPAC window here, if you have any test administrators that report out to you saying that they can't access or don't see the summative tests appearing in their TA interface, it's most likely they have not signed those forms yet, or they have not allowed for 30 to 60 minutes to lapse after submitting those electronic security forms. So you can actually go into TOMS right here by using this report, the security forms and remote administration status report, to actually see when those users completed the forms. This is just a brief example of what it'll look like in the spreadsheet once you've downloaded that report. You'll actually see based on the role they have. So usually test security agreement is referring to LEA coordinators and site coordinators. The test security affidavit is for users below the site coordinator, such as test administrator, test examiner. So you'll actually see what forms that they've signed and submitted and the actual date. So let's take today's example, May 27th. If this says, for example, 10 o'clock that they signed it and they're reporting to you, oh, I still can't see any summative tests, that's because they haven't allowed for the 30 to 60 minutes to lapse yet in order for our system to recognize they've completed those forms as well. So please make sure that you're using this report when you're having users reporting and saying they can't see the summative tests. Typically, if they haven't signed that form, they're only going to see the interim assessments. They will not see the summative assessments based on which role you've assigned them. As we have the ongoing initial ELPAC test as well, we want to make sure that in these fields specific, I've got a lot of questions so far, students that have enrolled in the LEA, they're not showing assigned in initial ELPAC even though they're eligible. 99% of the time, it's because these fields right here, the ones that are circled, are completely blank. So you need to make sure that you're working with your CALPADS administrator to ensure that the ELAS for the student shows as TBD. And then the primary language is anything other than English, as well as it should be also for ALS, American Sign Language, or ASL, excuse me. So just make sure that these fields, they must populate in order for a student to be eligible and assigned to the initial LPAC. So this is what we can use as well as you receive students for the initial LPAC, and this is specifically the THSS summary report. So please remember, if you have any students that are taking the initial LPAC, grades 3 through 12 have a component that needs to be hand scored in the hand scoring system in order for a score to produce. If it is not hand scored, or if it is scored but not submitted, what's going to happen is they're not going to have an SSR until that has been scored and submitted. So both of those need to be covered as well. Again, this goes, and I think Stephen addressed this earlier as well, the emails you've been receiving from Mr. Martin regarding the DEI. This is a little bit different. So this is not DEIs that haven't been completed yet, but this is what occurs, and this occurs a lot for both initial and for summative. We need to make sure that we're administering the speaking tests correctly. So what do I mean by that? We need to make sure that the speaking test is not just being paused, but it's being completed and submitted before entering those responses into the speaking DEI. What I've seen a lot of lately is they will stop at a certain point in the test if the student is not corresponding to the questions. Instead of ending that test, which is actually written in the DFA on how to do that properly to end test and not just pause the test. A lot of the time what's happening is they're pausing the test and then they begin entering the scores into the speaking DEI, complete that, and then the speaking test still remains in a pause status. So we need to make sure that the speaking test or assessment is being administered completely. And if the student again is not corresponding to any of the questions, you need to make sure that it is being it's being submitted and then completed as well, not just paused, because you'll keep receiving email notifications of a student not completing the speaking assessment if this is done. So just make sure that we're doing that correct as we end the window for summative LPAC, and then also goes for initial LPAC as well. This is on the side of alternate assessments, both CAASPP and ELPAC. So if a student starts, let's say they start the CAASPP first, but they're also eligible for the ELPAC, but they haven't started that yet, but it's determined by your IEP or 504 team that they should be taking the alternate. This is a case I see a lot appear in the field. So if they've already started the general assessment for CAASPP, but they need to have an alternate assessment for ELPAC, they cannot have a general for one and an alternate for another. What will need to happen is the CAASPP test, any subjects that have been completed, or if they're started midway through, you will have to file a STARS incident report to reset those tests before you can assign. Now, once the tests have been reset, once you assign them to the CAA for ELA math or science, they are also, and if they're eligible for the LPAC, they're automatically going to be assigned for the alternate LPAC. There's not a choice between that. It's either general assessments for all assessments or alternate for all. So please be aware of that as well before having any students start either one of the assessments. This is another really important thing I'd like to go over specifically since we're still have a little time for CAASPP. I know we don't have enough time or a lot of time left for ELPAC, but as we continue with the window, before having a student start any test, please just make sure that the TA or the test examiner or administrator is checking the eyeball icon specifically to see the details of any test settings for a student. Additionally, with that, if a student has a test support that is added, we want to allow at least 2 and up to 4 hours for that to register in the test delivery system. So if a student has not started any assessment, whether that be ELPAC or CAASPP, you can add any supports and or accommodations, pending if the student has an IEP or 504. You can add those, but you want to make sure you're waiting at least a minimum of 2 hours and up to 4 since we're in the peak testing season at this time. And then also before approving a student, just make sure that the TA or the test examiner or administrator is checking that eyeball icon before approving the student. If the setting is there, they do not want to approve the student and they want to reach out to their LEA coordinator directly for further guidance. And then their LEA coordinator can reach out to the success agent if they need further assistance. As we get and wind down again with the ELPAC summative window, completion status reports. So there is a links section within TOMS as opposed to downloading the TOMS report for the completion status report. That report is updated nightly. So if you have students finish in the morning for any test and you try to download the TOMS completion status report, you're not going to see that update until overnight. Sometimes there are some delays with that report as well because we are in peak testing season as well. So please be aware of that. But using the link section is going to give you a little bit more of a real-time update as far as students completing and submitting the test. So typically you go to the link section in TOMS and you'll see the third one down listed, which is completion status. You'll be then brought to a page, another tab will open up. You can either use 2 of these features, either plan and manage testing or search by SSID. So the first one, which is plan and manage testing, it's going to allow you to use a couple different search filters. So you have your basic search, which is new this year, and then you have an advanced search as well. So this is what the advanced search looks like. You'll be able to pull up the district, any schools associated with your LEA, and then when you choose you'll be able to choose the exact test you're looking for. And then the get specific portion is going to allow you to use a couple different radio buttons based on what information you're looking for. It's really important to make sure you're specifying because it's going to pull up certain different pieces of information based on which filter you use. Now, the second one is the search by SSID feature. This is one I like seeing and using a lot as well. So you can type in, I believe, up to 20 SSIDs as long as they're separated by a comma. And you can actually see any tests that a student has completed or which status they're in. So let's say, for example, you have a couple students that, my apologies for the sirens in the background, has a test that they have started but have not completed. You can actually use this feature to look up any student and you most likely will see them in a pause status, depending on if they have stopped or if they're within the expiration as well for a test. So say, for example, you have a student who started in the morning, has paused that test and will be resuming either later the afternoon or the next day. You'll actually use this system, type in their SSID, and you'll be able to see what status they are in. If they're going to be resuming later in the afternoon, you'll see it as paused on question 1 of 2 or question 16 of 35, again, based on which test that they're being administered to. But just a couple of things as well. When it comes to stairs, and I know I've worked with some of you out there in the field regarding requests to restore and resets, please note that specifically for ELPAC, tomorrow is the last day for any submission of stairs. Any stairs that is submitted past tomorrow on Wednesday, that's a case-by-case basis. But again, tomorrow, as far as the requests to restores and the resets for tests that have been ongoing, tomorrow is the last day since Saturday and or Friday, really technically, is our last day for the Summative ELPAC window. So please get those in as soon as possible if you have any of those particular scenarios that come up, because tomorrow is the last day. I'll take a look in the chat right now and see if I have any
I
questions.
think it was mostly addressed there. I think we did some self-policing.
Okay, great. Oh, if I may add one last thing when it comes to the alternate assessments. So when it comes to the CAA for ELA and the second scoring, and then also for the summative LPAC second scoring, every LEA, when you check on the completion status reports within the link section of TOMS, you will see if any student has been assigned to an alternate assessment, you'll see the second scoring. That's going to appear for all LEAs, regardless if you're on the list or not. If you are an LEA that does not second score for either of those tests, you can disregard what you're seeing on those completion reports. The reason it's there is because it appears for any LEA who has the alternate assessment or the CAAs. It's going to appear there. In that same category of CAAs, if for some reason second scoring has not been done, no need for alarm. No stairs needs to be filed if the second scoring was missing. But if, as you move forward with your second scoring, just make sure that it's completed to the best of your abilities, because there is the potential that you may be reassigned a form, or excuse me, a second scoring form for next year as well. But again, no stairs needs to be entered if the second scoring wasn't completed. Just make every attempt possible moving forward with your future second scoring that it's been completed for the year. Yeah, Yvette. So there's going to be an email that will go out. The forms I was mentioning and the reports I was mentioning, there actually would be an email sent to all the LEA coordinators letting them know before the rollover occurs, please make sure. But that date hasn't been released yet at this time as far as the rollovers. Hmm.
Marcus, we have a question in the room. Can you hear me?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, hold on.
So a couple questions. The first one is regarding SBAC for stairs. What's the absolute last date for that? I know you mentioned LPAC was 5/28.
That would be dependent on when your window closes for CAASPP. So as we're getting closer on the summit of LPAC side of things, tomorrow is the last and final day to submit stairs in order for us to have time to adequately process those stairs. But CAASPP is a little bit different. We typically take those on a case-by-case basis based on when the window does close. So if your window is closing like tomorrow or today, I would highly suggest submitting stairs if it needs to be done, or any assistance with stairs, just so if it happens to be a more complex case, we can process that with adequate time.
Okay, great. Thank you. And you mentioned two reports. You mentioned the student completion status report and the student completion status summary report. What are the difference between the two? And do site coordinators have access to those reports?
I believe site coordinators, if they go under the site level reports, should have access to those. But the only difference is the completion reports will show the breakdown, or excuse me, this completion summary reports will show the breakdown by school site. And for example, it'll show like, here's how many students were assigned to this particular test. Here's how many completed. Here's the ones who did not complete. And then the completion status report is going to show specifically like the plan and manage testing. It's going to show not broken down by school site, but by individual SSID in your LEA.
Well, I think, thank you, Marcus, for joining us. I just wanted to make sure everybody had a chance to fill out our end of year survey. We do have an extension activity for the folks who are in the room with us if they want to stay. We have some new insights we think we gleaned around the growth data from some memo that came out in April. And that material you can take a look at. We'll upload. We ran out of time this morning with all the technical issues, but we'll upload today's presentation. You can take a look at that on your own if you're not able to join us. But we hope that everybody has a great summer, and we'll be reconvening in August for our first kind of back to school meeting. It's all online. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to email us over the summer. We'll be around. So thank you very much and take care.